Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming. We're so happy to see this full house. Poetry always wins the day. Thank you also to Ludlow Assembly Rooms for letting me start this new poetry series of mine, and to Jess, who's not here, who's been just the most extraordinary host. Also thank you to Robert Willis, Dean Emeritus of Canterbury and Hereford. It's such a privilege to have him as my first speaker. And tonight we're going to explore together the codes of poetry from our two very different standpoints. His from the church, spiritual nature of poetry and music together, and mine from the arts. Some of you know my background, and how I've let poetry collide with it through the years. Complimentary drinks are now in the interval, you'll be pleased to hear, so they're on the horizon, bubbles halfway through. Let's make a start. Robert.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's get a microphone. I feel very privileged to be sitting here with Pelé. At the same time, this is a tremendous self-indulgence. In talking about your own creative gifts, there's a great enjoyment in searching back to see when things developed, and also who encouraged you, what encouraged you, which poems inspired you, and when you first started writing particular verses, and finding that that was really satisfying in a different way from prose. Now I think that we'll find throughout the evening that prose and poetry have no hard distinction between them. Sometimes a piece of prose can be essentially very poetic. And I think, for example, of St. Paul, who's generally a very prosy person, and then suddenly in a chapter like 1 Corinthians 13 launches in to that great hymn of love or charity, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels. That actually is, to me, prose poetry. And so we are holding a very thin curtain between the two, but there are times when, and I think of Cardinal Newman's motto, which he had as a cardinal, and that was, heart speaks to heart. And the language of the heart speaking to another heart becomes very much the language of poetry. Symbols are used. Intuitive response is required. And we find that certain poems at certain times of life that we may have known all our lives suddenly give us a new feeling of, this poem really is for me. If I go back and think of how poetry entered my own life, then I had a very musical mother and a rather more severe but very poetic father who could recite reams of Tennyson, just like that. I started some of them last night and Judy Cox joined in and said, oh, I know that, and started saying it with me. Sink me the ship, Master Gunner. Sink her and split her in twain. Fall into the hands of God, not into the hands of Spain. And the gunner said, aye, aye. But the seaman made reply, we have children, we have wives, and the Lord has spared our lives. Let us live to fight again another day. How can I remember that? Well, because he used to say it quite often, but at the same time, because the rhyme and the rhythm give you memory codes. And I find exactly the same, and we had quite a should we say heated, strong discussion about this. I find the same with tunes to the words that I set. And often it's the tune that will evoke the memory of the words. And that you found restrictive, and Pelé will talk about her own inspiration from other creative arts, because I think that when we are hearing poetry, even more than when we are writing poetry or imagining poetry, it's that time when you think, I remember that, and the tune will take you along, and other things will give prompts. Well, to go back, my mother would often sit at the piano with me, and we'd play things together. Quite often it was church music, hymnody, and very often hymnody is very fine poetry by people like George Herbert. We both love the verse, "A man that looks on glass, on it may stay his eye, or if he pleaseth, through it pass, and there the heaven espy." That is pure poetry. To espy heaven by breaking through the hard physical veil into the area of intuition and heartfelt imagination. All those things, Mother and I would quarry away at, and we'd sing parlour songs as well. And the tunes come back and they remind me of those happy times. But Father was the one who had the poetry inside him. And he loved nothing more than reading a section of the King James Bible where, for example, in Ecclesiastes or in the book of Job, you find huge passages of poetic prose. So what started me off in poetry itself? Well, I'm bound to say that a facility for rhyming words was given to me by the librettist WS Gilbert, because his magnificent and very correct language was something that I enjoyed playing on the piano and singing his words to. I always find it a lovely thing when there's a rhyme hanging in the air and you have to wait till the last line of the verse to find the very often one-syllable word that's going to seal it. But then at the same time, people like Housman, and I like to speak of him here in Ludlow, but I got to know him through his verses, and used to carry his Shropshire Lad and then the volume, because I found myself enjoying the poetry of Last Poems, his second volume, and that vast expanse of time between them. I found myself thinking, yes, I'd rather have that. So I then began to carry the collected version around. And other books too took their place. And one goes in and out of, shall we say, love affairs with poets, of their work. And you think, oh yes, I used really to idolize that. And now I'm into this, or I'm into that. And the verses are there with you. So that the rhythms and rhymes and meters help one. And in writing comic songs, and Mother used to say, you can always rhyme rubbish quite easily, but why don't you write something more serious? But it was the Bishop of Salisbury who first said to me, George Rindorp, write me a hymn for the festival we're going to have in the cathedral. And I did, with his encouragement and a little help from the precentor of Salisbury at that time, a man called C.V. Taylor, who was a great musician. And this is how the hymn came out. And it came from a verse in the first chapter of St. Mark. The kingdom is upon you, the voice of Jesus cries, fulfilling with its message the wisdom of the wise. It lightens with fresh insight the striving human mind, creating new dimensions of faith for all to find. God's kingdom is upon you. The message sounds today. It summons every pilgrim to take the questing way. With eyes intent on Jesus, our leader and our friend, who trod faith's road before us and trod it to the end. The kingdom is upon us. Stirred by the Spirit's breath, we glory in its freedom from emptiness and death. We celebrate its purpose, its mission and its goal, alive with the conviction that Christ can make us whole. I remember the feeling of a full Salisbury Cathedral singing that hymn for the first time, and the bishop, who was about to preach a sermon, was in the pulpit above me. And I looked up and he looked down and nodded as if to say, that's it. And it also said, don't stop there. So you have a go now and start.
Okay, thank you. My turn. I don't think I can beat it, but I'll try. I come from an extraordinary and interesting creative background. I was born into a wealth of inspiration. My father, a great sculptor, my mother, just a wonderful poetry lover like Roberts. I think what they taught me, looking back, is that art is never about you. That was my superpower, I think. And even though I was born into an Islington household that was full of artists every Saturday night, mostly men, talking about other great artists and themselves and each other, it was quite overwhelming for me and my sister. So when my mother cleverly started reading us poetry as bedtime stories, we found great sanctuary. Little did I know that that would end up leading my life, and that art and poetry became so intertwined was a joy to me and a great struggle. The one poem that I remember the most that Mum used to read to us is Tennyson, The Lady of Shalott. People say that, you know, children don't understand long poetry or it's too difficult for them. But to me, it was the opposite, and to many children, I think. It unlocks the imagination, unmediated. There's nobody else there but you and the language and the poet. And it lets us live in rooms where the ancients sing songs to us. So I thought, I know that Robert will agree with that, so I'm just going to read a couple of verses. I don't know how many of you know the poem, but I'm just going to read some of it and let the language wash over you and the rhythm and the meter, because no one does it like Tennyson. By the margin, willow veiled, slide the heavy barges trailed, by slow horses and unhailed, the shallop flitteth silken sailed, skimming down to Camelot. But who hath seen her wave her hand, or at the casement seen her stand? Or is she known in all the land, the Lady of Shalott? There she weaves by night and day a magic web with colours gay. She has heard a whisper say, a curse is on her if she stay to look down to Camelot. She knows not what the curse may be, and so she weaveth steadily, and little other care hath she, the Lady of Shalott. And moving through a mirror clear that hangs before her all the year, shadows of the world appear. There she sees the highway near, winding down to Camelot. There the river eddy whirls, and there the surly village churls and the red cloaks of market girls pass onward from Shalott. But in her web she still delights to weave the mirror's magic sights, for often through the silent nights a funeral with plumes and lights and music went to Camelot. Or when the moon was overhead, came two young lovers lately wed. I am half sick of shadows, said the Lady of Shalott. His broad clear brow in sunlight glowed, on burnished hooves his war-horse trod. From underneath his helmet flowed his coal-black curls as on he rode down to Camelot. From the bank and from the river he flashed into her crystal mirror. Tirra-lirra by the river sang Sir Lancelot. She left the web, she left the loom, she made 3 paces through the room. She saw the water lily bloom. She saw the helmet and the plume. She looked down to Camelot. Out flew the web and floated wide. The mirror cracked from side to side. The curse is come upon me, cried the Lady of Shalott. That's enough for now.
Do you want to go on? I think that that poem illustrates absolutely how verses stay in your mind. So that the beginning of that poem, on either side the river lie long fields of barley and of rye that clothe the world and meet the sky. And I think that rhythm in that case prompts you as you go through. I said I carried Housman with me, and I did for a long time, and know so many of his things by heart. But there is a wistful quality about Housman, a quality of loss, and probably the best poem, which you must, living here in Ludlow, know by heart, all of you, is the poem where he says, "Into my heart an air that kills from yon far country blows. What are those blue remembered hills? What spires? What farms are those? That is the land of lost content. I see it, shining plain, the happy highways where I went and cannot come again." There's that wistful quality which Housman has, and Thomas Hardy had exactly the same kind of quality. Sometimes in his pastoral novels, everything is happy, but in so many of his novels and poems, there is that quality of loss. And one of my favourite poems of Hardy is The Darkling Thrush. "I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled bine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead, in a full-hearted evensong of joy illimited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt and small, in blast-beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things, afar or nigh around, that I could think there trembled through his happy good-night air some blessed hope of which he knew, and I was unaware." That sense of loss, those of you who know that poem well, I missed out verse 2 just to give a little bit of a shorter poem for you. In looking at things that I had tried to write early on in boxes, it became easier because we've just cleared out the deanery, which was an enormous task. And in various boxes I found verses and other things that I'd written. When I went to Salisbury, Richard Shepherd used to set many of my words, and we would write comic operas together, which the lay clerks could perform at Southern Cathedrals festivals. But I found in one box this script. It's a libretto, which I'd written for him to set, and then the occasion never came about. It's actually a libretto of The Selfish Giant, the Oscar Wilde story of the giant who wouldn't allow the children to use his garden. And so the spring never came into his garden, only winter came into his garden. And then one day, after he'd been on holiday, he came back and found that the children had broken through the wall and the garden was full of flowers, and spring had begun to enter his garden. And then you'll remember there's one little boy who can't climb into the tree, and he takes pity on him, and that almost cracks the giant's heart because he's never known that pity before, and places the little boy up into the branch of a tree whose petals immediately turn beautiful colours. And the giant then is happy that the children are there, but the boy vanishes and he never sees him again, and he's full of sadness, but nevertheless is giving the children free rein of his garden. I'm saying all that because I wrote, I see here, I'd forgotten all about it, a free verse, shall we say, not with strict rhythms at all, of the Song of the Giant at his sense of pitiful loss that this child whom he'd loved in putting the boy into the tree and had taught him to love all the children in his garden, this child had gone. And here is the sort of freeish verse that I wrote at that time, which, as I say, I'd forgotten all about. This is the giant singing. Is this the way of love? One blissful, shining moment, then an age of longing? Is this the way of love? Is this the way of joy? A blaze of light upon the soul, and then a lifelong memory. Is this the way of joy? Is this the way of life? Yet, even so, I would regret no moment of that vision. He showed me joy and love. Now I can live in hope. So that lies in the hope of that libretto, having been written but never was set to music. But those kinds of poems, strict rhythm, and then a freer verse, and sometimes with no rhymes in them. But for the moment, I was contracted almost to write hymns. People would say, write me a hymn for this, write me a hymn for that. And with hymns, it's much more difficult to break out of the rhythm and line meter, because they fit together with the way we like to sing. So here's a harvest hymn, which was written at that kind of time when I was I wrote this at the beginning of my Canterbury time, about sort of 2001. We reap the harvests of the earth from seed which we have sown, fruit of our hopes and keen desires, with care and patience grown, conceived by faith with tender skills, God's gifts of priceless worth, creating, as the seasons pass, a green and fruitful earth. We see the harvests of the earth as sown by humankind, some rich with God's creative gifts of human hand or mind, while others, sown in selfish greed and scorn for human life, produce a barren harvest field of bleak and bitter strife. God reaps the harvest of the earth and treasures every grain, each golden seed of sacrifice, the fruit of love and pain. Such seeds as these will in due time, by God's creative hand, be sown again with patient care to bless the waiting land. So a harvest hymn of that sort. But at the same time, one went steadily on also writing hymns which gave the flavour of verses that were more poetic than hymn-like. Here's one which was written for a carol service in Canterbury Cathedral, and was originally set to music by Matthew Martin, who's now become quite famous as a composer. Frozen earth cries out for life, buried root and withered stem. With the gift of warm new birth, heaven responds at Bethlehem. Wounded earth cries out for peace, words to heal and not condemn. With angelic songs of hope, heaven responds at Bethlehem. Fearful earth cries out for love, brighter than a precious gem. With a newborn human child, heaven responds at Bethlehem. Or lastly, before we go back to Pelé, 3 verses complementing the verses of the Stabat Mater, Mary standing at the foot of the cross. And these two formed part of a composition by Matthew as he wrote a Stabat Mater, but put my English verses in between. Here are the 3 English verses. In silence crying at the cruelty of death, in love identifying with each agonizing breath, as you in torment to your Son prove true, O Blessed Mother, help us stand with you. In grief disabled by the appalling sense of loss, in patience waiting for some comfort at the cross, as you in torment to your Son prove true, O Blessed Mother, help us wait with you. In passion passive, like the suffering ones of earth, in destiny accepting of a broken world's new birth, as you in torment to your Son prove true. O Blessed Mother, help us watch with you. To you.
Wonderful, Robert, thank you. I've just melted. I went to boarding school, and for me it was horrible, like a garden perpetually winter, as Oscar Wilde would have understood. Not very nice people. Then I went to work at the Royal College of Art after doing art history at Nottingham to try and understand what art really meant for me. And I hated the Royal College of Art after 3 years. I thought, I've had enough of this, I'm going to Rome to be a poet. And the garden turned to summer. I was so happy there, and I started writing poetry. I read Seamus Heaney's Oxford Lectures, which, if you want to know what poetry really means, read them all. It might turn you into a poet. And then I had a slip disc, and I had to return to the UK, which was devastating for me. And I lay on the floor in my flat in Islington, reading Sylvia Plath, who for me was almost like a priestess of language. She knew how to make pain into something majestic and eloquent and plainly spoken. Everyone thinks poetry is very complicated, but I'm just going to read you a couple of verses from her poem Tulips, which she wrote when she was in a psych ward. And you'll understand what I mean. If you focus on the words she's chosen, you'll understand how simple they actually are. I'm going to stand up because you have to stand up for Sylvia Plath. Before they came, the air was calm enough, coming and going breath by breath without any fuss. Then the tulips filled it up like a loud noise. Now the air snags and eddies round them the way a river snags and eddies round a sunken, rust-red engine. They concentrate my attention that was happy, playing and resting without committing itself. The walls also seem to be warming themselves. The tulips should be behind bars like dangerous animals. They are opening like the mouth of some great African cat. I am aware of my heart. It opens and closes, its bowl of red blooms out of sheer love of me. The water I taste is warm and salt like the sea, and comes from a country far away as health. I applied for the MA at UEA under Andrew Motion. I was told that it was full up, there was no more applications, so I rang him and said, can I come and see you? Can I send you an application anyway? Anyway, I got on the course. He was a great teacher. When I had mental block one week, he said, go away and write 5 poems on one subject. So I did. Got my Philip Larkin collection, The North Ship, studied it very closely, and then wrote 5 poems. Took them to Andrew, and he said, you're trying to write like Philip Larkin, go away and write like yourself. I've been trying to do that ever since, like all diligent poets. I'll recite to you one of the poems that I wrote when I was there. He compared me to Emily Dickinson, which I then ate out on for years. It's not true, of course. But this is one that I used to say at parties. As a barrier, I suppose, and a way to show people who I was. Oh, and it's about my boyfriend at the time, who's called Misha Glennie. We used to drink in pubs in Islington together. Spectacle. If I wore glasses, darling, I would only take them off for you. Remove the delicate circles of glass trapped by wire, just like you do, and give the pub their frames for an hour while we two sat with nude eyes, busy being seen by the one other thing that knew. That got me through a lot of parties. It worked to say it with a drink, you know, in London sometimes. Poetry has a lot more presence in those situations than people think. And I learned as I went. After I left UEA, I went to be poet in residence at Tate Modern, wrote to Nick Sirota and said, I think you need a poet in residence, and he agreed. Went to New York to interview Louise Bourgeois. I recited that very poem to her and she started drawing. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. I became very preoccupied with artists and poetry, how poetry affected artists and how poets and artists could live together before what they created happened to them. When I got to the Royal Academy, I didn't want to write poems about the pictures on the walls because I thought that would be boring for everyone. So I decided to research the great artists and what their connection to poetry had been, and it was like I'd struck gold. Van Gogh was showing at the time, and his love of poetry is profound and spiritual.
Yeah.
He loves John Keats, Christina Rossetti, Longfellow. So I created a performance using only the poetry he loved and extracts from the Odyssey, because I figured he was a bit like Odysseus, and I just threw 3 actors on the stage and got them to recite it. And I needed an actor to play Van Gogh, and I didn't know any, so a friend said, I know this guy Christian Rowe, and he walked into the cafe in the Curzon in Soho, and I was like, he can't play Van Gogh. He was so tall, blonde, handsome, statuesque. So I said, okay, look, come outside onto the street and read me this letter by Van Gogh and let's see how it goes. And he rolled a licorice rolly, leaning against the wall, and recited this letter, and it was like Van Gogh had just walked up to me. So he played my Van Gogh. And before I pass over to Robert, I'd just like to read a little bit of this letter. If I can find it. I don't think I can find it. I might have to read it later. Oh, here it is. Painters, to speak only of them being dead and buried, speak to the following generation or to several following generations through their works. Is that all, or is there more even? In the life of the painter, death may perhaps not be the most difficult thing. For myself, I declare I don't know anything about it, but the sight of the stars always makes me dream in as simple a way as the black spots on the map representing towns and villages make me dream. Why, I say to myself, should the spots of light in the firmament be less accessible to us than the black spots on the map of France? Just as we take the train to go to Carcassonne or Rouen, we take death to go to a star. I'm sure that he wrote that beautifully because he read so much poetry.
Thank you. So as it becomes known that you are able to write verses, people begin to ask you to write verses for special occasions. And that's always very difficult because you're writing to order, and you have to decide how you pitch it and what kind of occasion it is. But it's also very enjoyable because in the end you're giving a gift which is especially for them, and there's nothing better than the gift of a good poem which expresses exactly what they wanted from it. So these 2 poems which I have here, which both sing, they were poems written in response to requests from hymn book companies for poems concerning tragedy and disaster. It's a terrible thing to think about, but nevertheless, we only had things like "O hear us when we cry to thee for those in trouble on the sea." And they'd been written 100 years ago or so. And there was nothing which spoke of the kind of disasters that could happen in a modern world. And the English Hymnal Company was the first one to ask for something like that. And then I had another request, which was for, I don't want to call it a festival, but a gathering together of people who had come for prayer following dark tragedies. And the first one, in the end, I don't know where the inspiration came from, but this is how it went. This is the response to the English hymnal for their times of trouble and distress and natural disasters and human occasions of violence. Earth's fragile beauties we possess as pilgrim gifts from God, and walk the slow and dangerous way his wounded feet have trod. Though faith by tragedy is rocked, and love with pain is scored, we sing the pilgrim's song of hope, your kingdom come, O Lord. Earth's human longings we possess, by love or grief compelled to take and bear the heavy cross Christ's wounded hands have held. By cloud and fire he leads us on, through famine, plague or sword, singing with faith the pilgrim's song, your kingdom come, O Lord. God's own true image we possess, in innocence first known, now tainted by the hate and spite to Christ's own body shown. By that same wounded heart of love, God's image is restored, to sing again the pilgrim's song, your kingdom come, O Lord. And the second, written for this great Mothers' Union Day of Prayer for natural disaster and people suffering in all lands. This came from a speech that Terry Waite, who'd been in dark captivity and with no news of any redemption coming to him, seeing a chink of light come from a shutter badly set in his cell, and the darkness suddenly gave way. And he gave this speech in the General Synod, which instantly, written on the back of a synod agenda, gave me the idea for this one, which Richard Shepherd set to music later. In a world where people walk in darkness, let us turn our faces to the light of God revealed in Jesus, to the day star scattering our night. For the light is stronger than the darkness, and the day will overcome the night. Though the shadows linger all around us, let us turn our faces to the light. In a world where suffering of the helpless casts a shadow all along the way, let us bear the cross of Christ with gladness and proclaim the dawning of the day. For the light is stronger than the darkness, and the day will overcome the night. Though the shadows linger all around us, let us turn our faces to the light. Let us light a candle in the darkness, in the face of death, a sign of life, as a sign of hope where all seemed hopeless, as a sign of peace in place of strife. For the light is stronger than the darkness, and the day will overcome the night. Though the shadows linger all around us, let us turn our faces to the light. Now, those are for disaster times, but there are other times you're asked to write something for a joyful occasion, and a wedding is about the most joyful occasion that you could find. I'm trying to find a hymn that was written for a wedding and set to music, and has now become a very good hymn to sing at the feast, I've got it, at the Epiphany, when the story is always told of the waiters where the wedding has run out of wine, and the waiters being told by Jesus at the instigation of his mother, she says to the waiters, do whatever he tells you. And he ordered them to fill the jars with water so that beautiful, good wine may be created from them. And this is what this hymn is trying to say, and it was written for a wedding. Love spoke the word, and by that word, pure water turned to wine, creating at the wedding feast love's first redemptive sign. For by that sign of water changed, humanity was blessed, able to share the self-same love through love the wedding guest. Love saw the need when wine ran dry, the wine cup to refill, met human need with his own life, and meets that longing still. For as in Cana on that day, 2 human lives were blessed, so richest blessings we receive from love the wedding guest. Love joins the feast to celebrate where love is freely given, creating from our human love the quality of heaven. So shall our life and love mature like wine pronounced the best, transformed to that which is divine through love the wedding guest. So there's a wedding hymn for you.
Robert's just going to play the piano before we go to the interval.
So, first of all, this is a Christmas carol which was written, and it's words, and then I'll play you the tune. Among earth's multitude of lights, a new star shines. It lights the journey of the wise who travel with deep searching eyes from eastern shrines. Among earth's languages and words, a new child sleeps. Amid the ceaseless noise of life, of strident power and angry strife, he silence keeps. Among earth's landscapes of despair, a new hope springs, which to the weary human form, new made as at creation's dawn, God's image brings. And the tune is a fairly regular one. I wrote it as a hymn tune that would be sung sort of 4 square, which is here. And the next one is a carol that I wrote for the girls' choir in Canterbury Cathedral, who weren't then allowed to sing at the Christmas carol service. That was for the boys. They were allowed to take part in the Advent. So I thought, how do I get round this? And so each year, for 4 years, I wrote a carol for the girls and said, oh, I'd like this sung at the carol service, and said, enter the girls' choir. And now, in the Church of England, if you do anything 2 years running, you can then say, as is our custom, next year. But this hymn, if I can just lay my hand on the words of it. Yes, here we are. This hymn was also a kind of tribute to those who wander the earth homeless, looking for home. And it's talking about Mary and Joseph. So I'll read the 3 verses and then play you the tune. Hard was the journey and crowded the pathways as Joseph for Mary sought shelter that night. For Galilee's home fires seemed far, far behind them when Bethlehem's lamps through the hills came in sight. Wearily, wearily onward to Bethlehem, seeking a welcome and comfort within. But voices there met them with no word of greeting, and stark was the message, no room at the inn. Over earth's pathways the people are moving, by will of great Caesar, compelled to leave home. From valley and village in Syrian landscapes, the people are moving, commanded to roam. Wearily, wearily onward to Bethlehem, hoping as night falls some shelter to win. but lamplight and firelight give false hope of welcome. The doors close against them, no room at the inn. Through the bleak darkness comes one sound of welcome, a voice giving promise of shelter and rest. Some kindly words spoken, a stable door opened, to find there a manger, as birds find their nest. Cheerily, cheerily, home now in Bethlehem, where for the Christ child new life must begin. For one voice of welcome, enough for God's purpose, is saying no longer, no room at the inn. And that I sort of set to a kind of folk tune, which the girls sang, first in harmony, and then with a descant. So let's set this up if it'll stay still. Can you hold this, Fletcher, so that it doesn't slide out of my reach? Thanks. A very different kind of style in a folky kind of rhythm. Very good for going to have a glass of Prosecco, which we now do.
Feels a bit more bubbly now. Thanks again for coming. You may have noticed on your seats is the card which I got done in time thanks to my lovely husband Fabio to put down on the seats tonight. It's on the 12th of September and it's another journey into poetry. Well, the reason I'm bringing it up now is because Robert refers to having love affairs with poets on the page. Well, about halfway through my story, I had a love affair with a real person who was married, and instead of turning the page, he took me to a very expensive hotel in California called the Ritz-Carlton. That was definitely a page I didn't think I would ever turn. I wrote a collection of poems when he went back to his marriage, partly to survive the situation. I hadn't written anything particularly worthwhile for a long time. I've been doing these performances at the Royal Academy, but I had to do it. And I knew from what the experience that poetry was the perfect form to express this story, because it's very crystallized, it's formal, but it's also a place of release, as Robert's referred to many times. I wrote it very quickly. I wrote it in about a month. I read it at the Cheltenham Literature Festival, and then the Sunday Times rang me up, magazine, and asked me to write a feature. I'd realised another reason I'd written it was because there's nothing in the history of literature written in the voice of the mistress. It's always the wife or the husband, and she's always a sort of scapegoated creature, gagged and thrown in the corner. Sharon Olds, I don't know if any of you know her work, she's a great American contemporary poet, had written recently a book, recently to my situation, a book called Stag's Leap, which was about a woman whose husband walked out the door for another woman, and she wrote it live, and it's extraordinary. So I felt like I was talking to her across the page and across continents. I wrote this feature in the Sunday Times magazine. It was prose, actually, partly because they said they'd include some of my poetry in the magazine, and I thought, well, if I can say I got poetry in the Sunday Times magazine, then it's worth, exposing myself. And also because, when you're a poet, you have to write something shocking. You're there to sort of disturb the universe, not write about flower pots or sunsets. So that was what led me forward. Anyway, on the 12th of September, I'm going to read the whole thing for the second poetry series, along with Christian Rowe, who's the actor who was so fantastic as Van Gogh, and he's going to be reading Ovid, because I thought it would be a good idea, or an interesting idea, to have this ancient voice speaking about mischievous flirtations, and then a contemporary woman reading about this extraordinarily painful event. Anyway, this is a small extract from one of the poems. It's called The Ritz-Carlton, Laguna Niguel. He goes away, he comes back, he goes away. He takes me to another hotel. It's higher, clearer, more beautiful. It is as if our affair has been moved to a costlier ocean. That low, cool marble atrium, the dollars of footsteps and orange blossom hoisted in their garlands, higher than us even. Everyone is in white, waiting as our car rounds the bend, a swarm of help. The valets come like large white butterflies. I have been lifted to a handmade heaven so visible it hurts. Wow, wow, I said, getting out of our black car into the white release of an asylum, millionaire America style. So this is love.
Well, thank you. That was costly. I want to explain the provenance of the three pieces that I want to read in different sections as we go through part 2 now. And they come from a particular commission from someone who loves to commission pieces and can well afford to do just that, and at the same time to encourage younger musicians, and was wanting maybe a cantata or a piece celebrating the holy angels, because there are so many Handel oratorios which speak about Judas Maccabeus or Solomon or even Messiah itself, but the holy angels are a force to be reckoned with. And this is him speaking. He said, I think that many more people have a sense of angelic presence sometimes in their lives than have a sense of the Holy Trinity as a doctrine. And this man is a very firm and devout Roman Catholic, but wanted this written. So he said, could you write that? So we talked long and hard about what that would look like, and I went home and Fletcher and I talked it over together to see how this might look, and I produced something which was fairly milk and water, and then Fletcher said, no, that's not what he wants at all, just you know, I'll lock you in a room and come out when you've written something that begins to look half like an oratorio on the holy angels. So that's where these come from. And I'd been a dean of a cathedral for over 30 years by then, Hereford first for 10 years and then Canterbury for 21. And it's the office of the dean always at matins and evensong daily, if present, to read the second lesson. And I therefore had been taken by a verger day after day for 30 years, except when I was away, to the lectern to read the Holy Scriptures. And therefore I was, even from my upbringing, I'd known the Gospels fairly well, but even more so now, I knew every sort of dot and comma by the time we'd finished that long sequence of reading aloud in public. And so I thought, well, perhaps in the epistles there was a sentence that could help me, and you agreed with this sentence as well. The sentence was from the epistle to the Hebrews, which said, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for in so doing many have entertained angels unawares." And so I thought at that time, yeah, that's the title. And that was seen to be not milk and water, but a strong title to have. And at the same time, I thought if we're going to do this, I think it does need to have structure. And at that time, I thought of Milton with his Paradise Lost. And Milton wrote in iambic pentameter the rhythms of weak strong, 10 syllables along the line. Not necessarily rhyming, could be in blank verse as it's called, but with this strong beat of iambic pentameter, a heartbeat, da-dum, 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 da-dum. And Shakespeare uses it for his sonnets, Chaucer uses it. You find it everywhere in English works, particularly. So I thought, why don't we do that? And I had in my mind this wonderful scene at the end of Paradise Lost, which you will all know, where Adam and Eve are about to be evicted from the Garden of Eden, from paradise. And the Archangel Michael comes down to give them a briefing about what's going to happen next in the outside world. And you'll remember, he says, please don't despair. And then he says, only add deeds to thy knowledge answerable, add faith, add virtue, patience, temperance, add love, by name to come called charity, the soul of all the rest. Then wilt thou not be loath to leave this paradise, but shall possess a paradise within thee, better far, And that seemed to me really powerful writing in iambic pentameter. And I sort of held on to it. And I thought, if we're doing Angels Unawares, we need scenes where someone is visited by an angel in some way, but they don't know it. And so there are plenty of scenes like that in the Gospels, and certainly in the Old Testament. And so I began to write. And once, sorry, that's my telephone, and I don't know what to do with it. Sorry. I meant to have sounds like that because I always forget to turn it off, and it doesn't matter. They just think a bird has got into Covent Garden if it starts. At this point, I thought maybe we start chronologically almost through the scriptures and find those scenes. And Fletcher said, we must have evil angels as well, because music is fairly threadbare if it's all good music. You really want themes, as in the Dream of Gerontius, where demons appear, or in the Apostles, where Judas gets the best part of singing rather than Jesus. And so at that point, I decided to go all the way back and write through. But I've chosen 3 of these tonight, and I'll do them in separate sections, and then we can have an interval between me going back to you, and I'll do the other 2 after that. This first one is called Ezekiel's Vision, and it is the prophet Ezekiel in exile with his people. Jerusalem lies in ruins, it's been totally destroyed by the Babylonians. And you have to just read Psalm 137, by the waters of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered thee, O Zion. As for our harps, we hung them on the trees that are therein. And these scenes of exile come in Ezekiel, but Ezekiel also has a vision of a bright future given to him by an angel. And here it is in the iambic pentameter. By Babylon's waters we sat down and wept, I and my people, far from our own land. For 25 years we dreamed of home, and of our ruined temple desolate. Beside the river Kibar's flowing course, an angel in my vision came to me, and showed me our own temple, now restored. But from the east, towards the rising sun, fresh waters from the altar flowed quite free. We stood outside and watched the river flow. The angel, with a measuring line at hand, caused me to walk 1,000 cubits east. The river swelled and now was ankle deep. 1,000 more, and water reached our knees. And then, beyond, it grew too deep to cross. But where the river flowed, all life would thrive. Trees grew where deserts were before. Fish filled its waters. Creatures of all kinds inhabited its banks. And where it flowed, waters which had been poisonous were made fresh. And it shall come to pass, the angel said, that where the river flows, lands will be healed, and on its banks the trees will bear their fruit, their leaves will never fade, and month by month new fruit will ripen, and all creatures feed. The leaves shall be for healing and for strength, for where the river flows, all life shall thrive. It seemed to me a good vision for our care, not only of the planet, but of each other at this time, as Ezekiel dreams his dream with the angel on the side of the Babylonian river, an exile far from home.
Thank you, Robert. That was very moving. So my love affair turned once more to the great dead poets. And I went to Rome, ran away again, back to that garden, and I discovered Keats. I was poet in residence at Keats Shelley House there, where Keats had died, and I was doing performances there to similar ilk to what I'd done at the Royal Academy, using only their texts to create the narratives. What Robert just read to me was very similar to a Keats poem. Some of you may know that he was a pharmacist at Guy's Hospital when he was young, and then he was so talented that they wanted him to assist in the operations, and he couldn't bear the blood, he couldn't bear the agony, so he gave up being a surgeon's assistant and decided to become a poet. And he formed this great belief that poetry was as healing as medicine. And just like Robert's poem that has just been read, something comes over you when you read Keats, that you feel healed and nurtured, and I mean way beyond those things. He wrote his 5 great odes in 3 months, then went to Rome sadly to die. His graveyard features in our film, which is a film that Damien Lewis agreed to be in during lockdown, playing Shelley, and we're now making another one. When I was in Rome, I met my now husband while my back was turned. The great Fabio Barry, he's not here, he's in Rome. But I wanted to mention him because he's been such an extraordinary influence on my work and my understanding of things. And there's a quote by Cicero about Homer, who was blind. That reminds me of Fabio. Tradition holds even now that Homer was blind, but we see his painting, not poetry. He didn't paint, by the way, he only ever wrote. What region, what coast, what place in Greece, what type and mode of fighting, what battle, what rowing, what movement of men or of beasts has not been so depicted that he has caused us to see what he himself could not have seen. And to me, poetry is one of the great painters. Anyway, Robert.
Thank you. So we come to the Gospels, and there's much more Old Testament in what I've written, but I've got 2 Gospel poems to finish with, and this first one for this section. I was reminded in going to Aardvark Books the other day and picking up a first sort of Penguin edition of some of the writings of Oscar Wilde, that in his De Profundis he is writing and he describes the fact that at Reading Jail at Christmas time, and he was coming toward the end of his time in prison, it would still be May before he was released, but at Christmas time the governor changed. And the new governor at Reading Jail, seeing what Wilde was trying to do, gave him for his use a Greek Testament. And Oscar Wilde says to Lord Alfred Douglas, whom he's writing to, it will be very good for you in your disordered life to do as I do each morning, because I find that walking into 12 verses of the Gospels plucked from anywhere is like walking into a garden of lilies out of a dark enclosure, and my prison feeling is lifted by this. And he said, to start that paragraph, I remember him saying, I have of late, sounds like Hamlet, I have of late been studying those 4 prose poems on the life of Jesus. That's what he calls the Gospels. I think it's a very enlightening way to think of them, because Jesus could draw perfect pictures in his parables, and those parables are what should we say, capable of all kinds of interpretation. But he could also, within the Gospels, the 4 evangelists are very, very good at drawing pictures of people. And the one that I am going to use now, the first of the poems from the Gospels, is what I called the Song of Mary of Magdala. And she is the one who's speaking. I watched life slowly drain upon the cross and felt the darkness once more fill my mind. That ancient darkness, hopeless and profound, which his own words of life had freed me from, when mind was filled with light and heart with love. Now it returned and blotted out that light, as life and love hung dying on the cross. I watched as Joseph led with tender care the broken, bleeding body taken down, laid carefully in his own sepulchre, and sealed with one huge stone to mark an end. The darkness once more filled my tortured mind, twisted with grief that endless Sabbath day, till with the dawn, the first day of the week, I felt impelled to journey to the tomb. I found it open, wounded body gone. Even a place to grieve him was denied. In panic, anger, hopelessness, I ran to the men whom he had called his friends, who came and saw, as I, an empty tomb, then left me in the garden all alone, the morning sunshine mocking my despair. Yet through my tears I sensed a presence there. The dark tomb seemed to shine with heaven's light, a light quite other than the morning sun, that spoke of hope, of promises reborn. Two angels gently asked me why I wept, their words of comfort causing me to turn. I heard a voice which simply called my name. I knew him then as love, and hope returned. Rabboni, I replied. All would be well.
Wow. Okay, thanks, Robert. I hope this works. I've just got a little slide to show you. I moved to San Francisco with Fabio after I met him, and I got the phone call every poet dreams of from an architect saying, Pelé, it's Eric Parry, quite a well-known British architect. I need you to write a poem for a frieze in the Chelsea Barracks development. I need it to be 3,000 characters long and to cover 4 elevations. And I need it in 3 months. So I said, okay. Luckily I was married to Fabio at that point, and he helped me a lot. He said, why don't you write a cento? Well, actually it was my idea, and he said, that's a cento. And a cento is a Roman form, a collection of poems. A poem made by other poems, lines of other poems by other poets, and I can't get this working.
Oh, damn.
Damn it. What am I doing wrong? Sorry about this.
Where's it coming from?
Should be coming from my computer. Shall I keep talking?
Go back.
Back. Anyway, so we were in a little flat in San Francisco, and I got my moleskin notebook, I tore out the pages, and I wrote out this poem. I stretched the moleskin pages all along my wall to make it look like a frieze on the inside, and I plucked out beautiful lines. Each elevation was looking out over a different scene. So one was looking out over the Chelsea pensioners' house, one was looking out over the Chelsea Physic Garden, one was looking out over the river, and the other was looking out over Ranelagh, the old Ranelagh Gardens where they used to, the pleasure garden. So I constructed this feeling I wanted to evoke, and then I found the lines by other poets and my own, and lay them in lines of 3. so that you could read them along like that in lines, or you could read them in the panel. There were 40 panels which covered the whole scheme. Or you could read them, make your own poem and choose a line like rose, thorn, war. So standing there as a spectator looking up, you became a part of the poem. And that was the idea. And when my dad walked past it, he burst into tears. He says he can't believe how amazing it is. And I can't really read you the poem because it doesn't work on the page. It only works there and carved into the Portuguese limestone. And you may not even be able to see it on the wall. But it doesn't matter, we don't need to look at it now. I'll talk about it another time. And yes, so there it is, set in stone, a poet's dream. If you stretch it out, it's the length of 2 football fields. And it really does work in the stone. And to walk round it, when you walk round it, the poem moves and is a living thing. Yeah, so I did that. So that was nice. They paid me 15,000 quid for that. It's the most I've ever been paid for anything. And there it is. So, Robert.
Well, I think that's probably a prompt to go straight there and see it, and walk around it on the 4 sides, and it really is wonderful to see. And so I'm sorry that we've not been able to see it tonight, but the real thing is infinitely better.
Yeah.
To see one day. So, and congratulations on that. It's a lovely piece of work. So we come to the third of the gospel prose poems pictures, and this is one from the story in St. John's Gospel, the first chapter, where Jesus meets Nathaniel. It's a wonderful 12th century stained glass in Canterbury Cathedral of that scene where Philip and Andrew and Nathaniel and Jesus are standing there, and they're all labelled in Latin, and there also is the 5th character, which is the fig tree, and there it says ficus against it, as though it's a character in the plot. We remember that Philip is the one who comes to call Nathaniel to Jesus, and here it is again in iambic pentameter, the song of Nathaniel. So he is the spokesman now. Beneath the green-leaved fig tree I would pray, beside the shore of Galilee's great sea, when fishing nets were mended for that day and shelter needed from the noontide heat. 'Twas there that Philip called me, and I came, smiling, at the fantastic claim he made for Jesus from unlikely Nazareth that day. What good could come from there, it seemed to me. He brought me on Bethsaida's homely shore, amidst the places we had known since birth, and stood me in the compass of his gaze, who likewise smiled, and with amusement said, Behold an Israelite who knows no guile. With beating heart I asked him how he knew. Beneath the fig I saw you, he replied. You are the Son of God, and Israel's King. The words came out unasked from deep within. You say that, he replied, still with surprise, because I say I saw you in the shade beneath the fig tree's leaves. You shall see more. See open heavens and angels sent from God ascend and descend on the Son of Man. My eyes were opened, and new life began. So that's just 3 of the poems. I was going to end with something a bit lighter, if that's all right, before it's...
I was just going to ask you, how long will the oratorio be, and when can we hear it?
Well, it's at the moment, in the mind of the persons commissioning it, it's being composed by James MacMillan, and it's thought that it will take place in the Sistine Chapel at the end of 25. So who knows if that's, and so that's not in any way definite. That is the dream of the man commissioning it, and he's a person who is not to be doubted, really.
The slides are going to be 2 seconds, so we can go back to the slides now. So he's just going to tell us.
That's right.
Okay.
We may get your picture.
Do you want to read your...
I will, yes.
cheerful
Yes,
thing?
okay. This is something silly. It's not from me at all. It's a friend of ours who's called Laurie Duncan Wedd, whose wife is the curator of the lovely church in Tudley with all the lovely Chagall glass there. And he's shown us around it many times, but he's no mean musician and writes lovely songs and sings them to his guitar. This is quite unlike anything we've had tonight, but it's a bit of loose verse writing by Laurie Duncan Webb, and it comes from standing on the platform at Sevenoaks Station, watching the commuters going off to their office in the morning and imagining what's going on amongst them. Here we are. It's simply called Sevenoaks. Waiting at the railway station, got to hide my desperation, keep it in. Got to work before the rest, got to be the first, the best, got to win. Feed the illusion of control, feel the pressure crush your soul, thicken skin. Got to have the perfect life, eaten kids and trophy wife, thick and thin. Rich as Croesus wanting more, see no crime but being poor, now that's a sin. Never made to look a fool, massive house and kidney pool, bespoke gym, waiting for the heart attack that kills you stone dead like a rat, so warfarin. Everything is clean and bright. Alva Alto, Frank Lloyd Wright, Taliesin. En vacances, la vie française. Yacht in Nice, that's what it says on the tin. Failure can't be contemplated, straight jacketed and sedated, loony bin. Only winning makes me whole, size 10 ego, size 5 soul. Let war begin. Just a piece of nonsense, but I feel that Laurie has sort of insights in that. Sorry. Ending on a different note.
Maybe.
Are we there?
Oh, yes.
Good.
I won't take long, just so you didn't leave feeling hard done by. Yeah, so this is the site.
I'm probably in the way.
No, you're never in the way, Rob.
I am.
Impossible thing. That's one Grenadier Gardens where the yellow is, that's where my frieze is. And Eric's building. Yeah, that's his design. He was going to have horses around it, but they were more expensive, so he rang me instead. Thankfully. Oh, this is it. So that's the book, my amazing book that I've got here right on the table, which is the Norton Anthology of Poetry. And I just carved out verses just to see how they would look if they were stretched out in panels along a wall. That's my note, that's my San Francisco carpet. See, I was dividing up words, passages, lines to make something that could look architectural. I think it was good, it was in at the deep end. So yeah, like elements, poplars, sacred to palace, bubbling. Also you had to work out where the word could end and begin in the new panel. And there was no punctuation, it was just a dot between each word. It was quite liberating actually. That's me on the floor doing it. The poem grows, time shortens. Fabio wrote that. Sorry, it's going a bit. The same. That's it. That's one elevation. See what I mean? You can't really see it from here. Maybe it would have been better just to leave the mystery after all. But yes, please go and see it. That's it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. It is very, very much worth going to see and walk all the way around too.
Robert, should we just go to questions?
Yes. Yep. We're thinking we'll have the lights put on and then we can go back to questions and comments just for a bit. And if any of you are wanting to leave, where are we now? It's just after 9:15, so don't be frightened to sort of tiptoe out if you've other things to do. but we'll have 10 minutes of comments and questions, because you must have things inside you that you might want to say. Anyone being brave?
Tired, maybe.
What?
Tired, maybe.
Yes. I think we're... Oh, yes, please.
It's me again, I'm afraid.
Don't be afraid, it'll spark the rest.
The question I wanted to ask both of you, or each of you, is when the poetic urge calls, and you have written, and I'm reminded of something that Thomas Hardy answered when he was asked, do you like writing? And he said, no, but I'm glad when I've written. Which do you feel, if you have written something that you are pleased with, is it an exorcism or is it a catharsis?
Do you want to go first?
Okay. Yes. I mean, to me, it's neither really. It's I would say it's a sort of birth of something that's been within you, and as with all creative things, if it comes out to your satisfaction, there is intense pleasure.
Yes.
And you know that this is something that you can share with people, and you never know which unlikely person is going to come up and say, that really touched me to the quick, especially the line, and usually it's the most surprising line that you almost cut out, that kind of things go on. But it is a sharing of part of yourself, and so an intense pleasure if it comes out well.
Yeah, just quickly, that's a great question. When I was younger, I used to run across the room to grab my pen and notebook before I changed my mind. Fear, probably. But then when I wrote the Mistress Account, I had to tell the story, and I had to lift myself up off the floor to tell the story. And somebody said to me who read the poems, before now you were writing poetry with a capital P, and now you're writing real poetry with a small p. So I think it's about how epic it feels, or how real you want it to be, or how true you want to be. And that's a reflection always of yourself.
Vaughan Williams' Fourth Symphony, which is very unusual because it's very atonal, said of it when he was conducting the first rehearsals, well, if that's modern music, you can keep it, but I wrote what I meant. And how does one self-edit? You've expressed yourself, but how does one know, until it's read by other people or you read it to other people, that what you've expressed actually communicates?
You don't.
No.
You don't. It's poetry is either yours inside you, and it's still yours when it's in front of you on the page, and you can be full of satisfaction. But until it takes birth in someone else, you don't know whether this child has a life,
yes,
which is going to help the other people. And when the first come and say, this is just wonderful at something or other, you think, well, good. That's a lovely feeling.
Well, it's definitely a yes from us, I think, Robert, in your case. Thank you.
What was I going to say about that? And, carry on for the moment, please, and we'll.
Maybe everyone. Maybe that's it.
Anything else?
Pelé, you mentioned writing prose, and I know that you've written much more than just the example that you gave. And Robert, with you composing music as well as doing verse, do you find that working in different media brings out a different you?
Yes, I find it much harder writing music onto a page than I do putting words down. But sometimes a tune's in my head. But being a librettist myself, I never would say to anyone who was setting my thing to music, this is the tune I have in my head, it would be fatal. And one is told that with the Gilbert and Sullivan partnership, Gilbert always had a tune in his head, though his voice was apparently tuneless. And Sullivan had said, do never sing the tune to me, except when they got to Jack Point's song, the Jester's song in The Yeoman of the Guard, and he couldn't get anything from it. So he asked Gilbert to hum the tune that he had in his head. I think after that, any tune would have done.
And I just like to say, yes, the extraordinary privilege of being asked to do something so civic with the frieze. It made me feel like a different person. And also I teach now at Gather up in some of my students are here in Ludlow, and teaching is to me the greatest craft and privilege of all, to share great poems with budding poets. We couldn't get better than that.
Should we stop?
Yes, we'll stop. I was just going to say, in answer to your question, one of my favourite poems is Siegfried Sassoon's Everyone Suddenly Burst Out Singing.
Yes.
And that sort of as a conclusion of the First World War, and everything he'd been through seemed to me to be the most lovely expression of Sassoon himself.
We'll go home and read it. Thank you.
Thank you.